From a tragic AIDS poster coincidence to Nas's debut track, script dialogue lifted from actual high school cafeteria recordings, and a co-star who mysteriously never acted again, this forgotten indie film hides shocking production secrets, casting near misses with future Oscar winners, and bizarre filming locations that completely baffled critics. Discover the wild truth behind this controversial 1992 drama. Fact 1. Triple acting debut launched 3 careers. When Zebrahead hit theaters in 1992, audiences witnessed something incredibly rare in Hollywood. 3 major contributors to a film making their professional debuts all at once. Michael Rapaport, who played the lead character Zach, had never appeared in a movie before this role. N'Bushu Wright, who portrayed Nikki, the female lead at the center of the film's interracial romance storyline, was also stepping in front of a camera for the first time in her career. But perhaps most remarkably, director Anthony Drazan was making his directorial debut with this same production, meaning the person guiding the entire ship had never helmed a feature film either. This unusual situation created a unique dynamic on set, where everyone was learning together and experiencing the filmmaking process from scratch. For a movie tackling such heavy themes about race relations, teenage identity, and urban violence in early 90s Detroit, having 3 complete newcomers in such crucial positions was a massive gamble. The film's producer took a chance on all 3 simultaneously, trusting that their raw talent and fresh perspectives would outweigh their lack of experience. This bet ultimately paid off when the movie premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won the Filmmaker Trophy, launching all 3 careers in one fell swoop. Rapaport went on to become a recognizable character actor in dozens of major films and television shows. Wright built a respectable career in Hollywood, and Drazan established himself as a director in the indie film world. The fact that none of them had done this before somehow worked in the film's favor, giving it an authentic, unpolished energy that felt genuinely raw and real. Fact 2. Rapper MC Serch lost the lead role. Before Michael Rapaport ever set foot on the Zebrahead set, another white New York artist desperately wanted the part of Zach, MC Serch, 1/3 of the legendary hip-hop group Third Base. Serch, whose real name is Michael Barron, saw himself as the perfect fit for this role about a white teenager deeply immersed in black culture and hip-hop. He actively campaigned for the part, using his connections in the music industry to get meetings with the producers and make his case directly. Serch argued that his real-life experience as a white rapper who had earned respect in the predominantly black hip-hop community gave him unique insight into the character's journey and struggles. He understood firsthand what it meant to navigate between 2 worlds and face questions about cultural authenticity. The filmmakers seriously considered him, but ultimately decided to go with Rapaport, who had more traditional acting training and a different energy that better suited their vision for Zach. Rather than walking away bitter about the rejection, Serch negotiated a different role in the production. He became the film's music supervisor, which gave him control over one of the movie's most important elements: its soundtrack. This position allowed Serch to curate the hip-hop tracks that would underscore the entire film and help establish its authentic early 90s New York sound. He used his industry relationships to secure tracks from major artists and emerging rappers, ultimately creating a soundtrack that became one of the film's most praised elements. So while Serch didn't get to star in Zebrahead, he still left his fingerprints all over the finished product. Fact 3. Future Oscar winner Adrien Brody almost starred years before. Adrien Brody won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his haunting performance in The Pianist. He was just another struggling young actor auditioning for indie films in New York City. One of those auditions happened to be for the lead role in Zebrahead, and Brody came very close to landing the part of Zach. At the time, Brody was still relatively unknown, having appeared in small roles here and there, but not yet breaking through to major recognition. The casting directors brought him in to read for the part, and according to production records, he made a strong impression during his audition. Brody had the right look and the New York authenticity the filmmakers wanted, plus he could tap into the vulnerability and confusion the character needed. However, the role ultimately went to Michael Rapaport instead, who brought a different energy and physicality to Zach. Looking back, it's fascinating to imagine how different both actors' careers might have been if Brody had gotten the part. Rapaport built his entire career on playing tough, street-smart New York characters, and Zebrahead was the foundation for that persona. If Brody had taken the role, he might have been typecast in similar parts instead of eventually becoming known for more dramatic, serious roles. Meanwhile, Rappaport might have had to find a different breakthrough project, potentially taking his career in a completely different direction. The sliding doors moment happened during those auditions, and both actors ended up following separate paths to success. Brody eventually earned critical acclaim and an Oscar, while Rappaport became one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors. Fact 4. Nas's debut single, Halftime, premiered here. One of the most historically significant aspects of the Zebrahead soundtrack is that it featured the very first solo single from a then-unknown Queens rapper named Nasir Jones, better known as Nas. The track, called Halftime, appeared on the Zebrahead soundtrack in 1992, marking Nas's debut as a solo artist after he had been building buzz through guest appearances on other artists' songs. At the time, most people outside of hardcore hip-hop circles had never heard of Nas, but industry insiders knew he was special. The song showcased his complex wordplay, jazz-influenced production, and the distinctive voice that would later make him a legend. MC Serch, who served as the film's music supervisor, played a crucial role in getting Halftime onto the soundtrack. Serch had discovered Nas earlier and recognized his enormous potential, so he used his position on Zebrahead to give the young rapper wider exposure. When the soundtrack was released, Halftime became one of the standout tracks, earning praise from critics and helping build anticipation for Nas's debut album. Less than 2 years later, in 1994, Nas released Illmatic, which is now considered one of the greatest hip-hop albums ever made. Interestingly, Halftime was included as the opening track on Illmatic, giving it a second life and cementing its place in hip-hop history. So anyone who picked up the Zebrahead soundtrack in '92 got to hear a legendary track before most of the world even knew who Nas was. The song's placement in this small indie film helped launch one of rap's most celebrated careers. Fact 5. Tragic AIDS poster coincidence. One of the most unsettling moments when watching Zebrahead today happens during a scene where a poster hanging in the school hallway reads, "AIDS is real, protect yourself." The poster appears just one scene after Ray Sharkey's character is shown on screen, creating an eerie and tragic connection that no one involved with the production could have anticipated. Sharkey, a talented actor who had previously won a Golden Globe for his work in The Idolmaker, played a supporting role in Zebrahead as one of the adult characters. The poster was simply part of the realistic set, dressing meant to reflect the social issues and health education campaigns prominent in early '90s high schools, where AIDS awareness had become a major focus. However, the placement of that poster right after Sharkey appears on screen now carries devastating weight because Sharkey died from AIDS-related complications in June of 1993, less than a year after Zebrahead was released in theaters. He had contracted HIV years earlier, but his diagnosis wasn't widely known during the filming. No one on set had any idea that the AIDS awareness poster in the background would serve as such a painful foreshadowing of Sharkey's own fate. The coincidence feels almost too eerie to be accidental, like the film somehow predicted what was coming. For viewers who know Sharkey's story, that brief shot of the poster transforms from ordinary set decoration into a haunting memorial. Zebrahead ended up being one of Sharkey's final film roles, making the entire situation even more poignant and tragic. Fact 6. Deshaun Castle's one and only role. Sometimes actors appear in a single film and then vanish completely from the entertainment industry, leaving people wondering what happened to them. Deshaun Castle, who played the character D in Zebrahead, is one of the most mysterious examples of this phenomenon. Castle wasn't a professional actor when he was cast in the film. Instead, he was discovered by director Anthony Drizan during the research phase for the movie, when Drizan was spending time at a high school in Yonkers, New York, observing real teenagers to inform his screenplay. Castle caught Drizan's attention because he had the natural charisma, authenticity, and presence the director wanted for the character of D, one of the central figures in the film's group of friends. Drizan convinced Castle to audition and eventually offered him the role, bringing him into the world of professional filmmaking. Castle delivered a solid, naturalistic performance in Zebrahead that felt completely genuine and unforced, exactly what Drazan had been hoping for when he cast a non-actor. But after the film wrapped and was released in theaters, Castle never pursued acting further. He didn't appear in any other movies, television shows, commercials, or stage productions. There are no follow-up roles listed in his filmography, no interviews where he discusses his acting career, and virtually no public information about what he chose to do instead. It's as if he stepped into the film industry for one brief moment, contributed to this indie production, and then stepped back out completely. For viewers who enjoyed his performance, it's fascinating and frustrating to know that he never acted again. Fact 7. Director secretly recorded real teenagers. Director Anthony Drazan wanted the dialogue in Zebrahead to sound absolutely authentic, capturing the way real teenagers actually spoke to each other rather than how Hollywood writers imagined they talked. To achieve this, he took an unusual and somewhat controversial approach during the film's development. Drazan spent weeks hanging around a high school cafeteria in Yonkers, New York, with recording equipment, secretly capturing hours and hours of actual conversations between real students. He positioned himself in the cafeteria during lunch periods and breaks, when teenagers were relaxed and talking naturally among their friends without any adult supervision or filter. The students had no idea they were being recorded or that their casual conversations about relationships, race, music, conflicts, and daily drama would end up being studied and analyzed by a filmmaker. Drazan took these recordings back to his office and transcribed them word for word, studying the rhythms, slang, interruptions, and natural flow of how young people communicated with each other. He then incorporated these authentic speech patterns, phrases, and conversational styles directly into his screenplay, essentially translating real teenage dialogue into the mouths of his fictional characters. This technique gave Zebrahead a raw, unscripted quality that made the interactions between characters feel genuinely spontaneous rather than carefully written. Critics and audiences noticed that the dialogue had an unusual authenticity compared to other teen movies of the era, though most had no idea where that realism came from. Today, this kind of secret recording would likely raise serious ethical and legal concerns about consent and privacy. But in the early 90s, Drazan was able to use this guerrilla research method to create one of the film's most distinctive qualities. Fact 8. The script originally set in 1973. When Anthony Drazan first sat down to write what would eventually become Zebrahead, he wasn't imagining a contemporary story set in the early 1990s. Instead, his original screenplay was set nearly 20 years earlier in 1973 during a completely different era of American racial tensions and cultural dynamics. Drazan envisioned the story taking place during the aftermath of the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, and the social upheaval that defined the early 70s. In this version, the characters would have been navigating racial identity and interracial relationships against the backdrop of that specific historical moment, with different music, fashion, and cultural references shaping their world. The early 70s setting would have given the film a period piece quality, requiring careful attention to historical detail and vintage aesthetics. However, before Drazan could move forward with production, he participated in a development workshop at the Sundance Institute, where he received extensive feedback from other filmmakers, mentors, and industry professionals about his screenplay. The consensus among these advisors was that the story would be more powerful and relevant if it was updated to take place in contemporary times, reflecting the racial dynamics and tensions that still existed in America during the early 90s. They argued that setting the film in the present day would make it feel more immediate and urgent for audiences, rather than positioning it as a historical drama about issues that people might assume were resolved. Drazan took this feedback seriously and completely rewrote the screenplay, moving the entire story from 1973 to 1992 and updating all the cultural references, music, slang, and social contexts accordingly. Fact 9. Released as The Color of Love in UK. When Zebrahead was prepared for international distribution, the filmmakers faced a significant problem with the United Kingdom market. The original title carried connotations and imagery that British distributors worried would be too provocative or might be misunderstood by audiences unfamiliar with American racial terminology and cultural context. The term Zebrahead itself was slang that referenced racial mixing and cultural crossover, using the imagery of a zebra's black and white stripes as a metaphor. While American audiences would likely understand these references, UK distributors felt the title might be too obscure or potentially offensive without the proper cultural framework. Rather than risk confusion or controversy, the British distributors made the decision to completely retitle the film for its United Kingdom release. They renamed it The Colour of Love, using the British spelling of colour instead of the American color. This new title stripped away all the provocative racial imagery and metaphorical language of the original, replacing it with something much more generic and romantic sounding. The new title focused on the interracial love story aspect of the plot, while avoiding any direct references to race or cultural mixing. From a marketing perspective, The Colour of Love positioned the film as more of a conventional teenage romance, rather than the edgy, controversial indie drama about racial identity that the original title suggested. This kind of international retitling was fairly common in the 90s, when distributors often worried that culturally specific references wouldn't translate well across different markets. However, the change fundamentally altered how the film was perceived and marketed to British audiences, removing much of the provocative edge that made the American version feel bold and confrontational. Fact 10. Box office disaster. Despite critical acclaim, Zebrahead arrived at the Sundance Film Festival in January of 1992 as one of the most buzzed-about entries in the dramatic competition, and it lived up to the hype by winning the prestigious Filmmaker Trophy. This award recognized director Anthony Drazan's achievement and seemed to position the film for commercial success when it received theatrical distribution later that year. The critical reception was strong, with many reviewers praising the film's authentic performances, unflinching look at racial tensions, and realistic dialogue. Everything seemed to be in place for Zebrahead to become one of those breakout indie successes that occasionally cross over into mainstream popularity. However, when the film finally opened in theaters on a relatively wide release of 251 screens, the box office results were absolutely devastating. In its opening week, Zebrahead earned only $615,000 total across all those theaters, which worked out to an average of less than $2,500 per screen. These numbers were catastrophically low, especially when compared to the $2.8 million marketing campaign that the distributor had invested to promote the film. The marketing budget alone was more than 4 times what the movie earned in its entire opening week, meaning the distributors lost massive amounts of money right out of the gate. The film quickly disappeared from theaters and failed to recoup its costs through its theatrical run. This commercial failure demonstrated the harsh reality that critical acclaim and festival awards don't automatically translate into ticket sales, especially for small indie dramas about uncomfortable racial subjects that don't feature major stars or high-concept hooks that mainstream audiences find appealing. Fact 11. Filmed at real skating rink with violent history. The climactic shooting scene that serves as one of Zebrahead's most intense and tragic moments was filmed at a real location in Detroit that carried its own history of violence and tragedy. Skateland on Alter Road. This wasn't just any skating rink chosen randomly by the location scouts. Skateland had been the site of numerous actual shootings and violent incidents over the years, giving it a dark reputation in the Detroit community that local residents immediately recognized when they saw it on screen. The rink sat near the boundary between predominantly black and predominantly white neighborhoods, making it a flashpoint for racial tensions and conflicts. Fights, shootings, and other violent confrontations had occurred there multiple times, turning what should have been a fun recreational space for teenagers into a place associated with danger and tragedy. Director Anthony Drazan and his location scouts were aware of this history when they chose to film there, and they likely saw it as adding a layer of grim authenticity to the scene. They weren't creating violence in a sanitized, neutral location and asking audiences to imagine it as dangerous. Instead, they were filming in a space where real violence had actually occurred, where real blood had been spilled, and real lives had been affected. For Detroit audiences who knew Skateland's reputation, seeing it on screen in Zebrahead created an unsettling recognition. They weren't watching a fictional location stand in for a dangerous place, they were watching the actual dangerous place itself. This choice gave the scene additional weight and realism, grounding the film's tragedy in a reality that extended beyond the fictional story into the actual lived experience of Detroit residents. Fact 12. Roger Ebert said director ran out of money. When legendary film critic Roger Ebert reviewed Zebrahead for the Chicago Sun-Times, he gave the movie a mixed assessment that praised certain elements while criticizing others. But one particular comment in his review has become infamous among fans of the film because it suggests a behind-the-scenes problem that was visible in the finished product. Ebert wrote that Zebrahead felt incomplete and underdeveloped, with several subplots that were introduced but never properly resolved or explained. Rather than attributing this to poor storytelling choices, Ebert speculated that director Anthony Drazan simply didn't have the money to finish what he had started. According to Ebert's assessment, it seemed like the film had run out of budget during production or post-production, forcing Drazan to abandon certain storylines and leave questions unanswered, rather than filming the additional scenes needed to properly conclude them. This was a particularly damning criticism because it suggested the film's flaws weren't creative failures, but financial limitations, implying that Drazan might have made a better movie if only he had more resources available. Whether Ebert's theory was accurate or not is unclear, as Drazan and the producers never publicly confirmed that budget problems affected the final edit. However, Ebert's observation points to a common struggle in independent filmmaking, where directors often have ambitious visions that exceed their limited budgets, forcing them to make difficult compromises about what can actually be filmed and completed. The fact that one of America's most respected film critics noticed these gaps and attributed them to financial constraints rather than artistic choices suggests the budget limitations were evident enough to be visible to professional observers. Fact 13. Oliver Stone's involvement was just his name. When Zebrahead was marketed to audiences and the press, the promotional materials prominently featured the phrase "Oliver Stone Presents" above the title, suggesting that the legendary controversial filmmaker behind Platoon, born on the 4th of July, and JFK was intimately involved with this indie drama about race and teenage identity. For potential viewers who admired Stone's bold, provocative filmmaking style, his name attached to the project seemed like a seal of approval and a promise that Zebrahead would have the same fearless approach to controversial subjects. However, the reality of Stone's involvement was far less substantial than the marketing implied. Stone served as an executive producer on Zebrahead, which is typically a position that involves minimal day-to-day creative participation in the actual filmmaking process. Executive producers often provide financial backing, use their industry connections to help secure distribution, or lend their prestigious names to projects to attract attention and funding. But they don't usually participate in directing, editing, or making creative decisions about the film itself. In Stone's case, his involvement with Zebrahead appears to have been primarily about lending his name and reputation to help the film get made and distributed, rather than shaping its content or vision. Director Anthony Drazan was in charge of all the creative decisions, and there's no evidence that Stone visited the set, consulted on the script, or influenced the final edit. This practice of using a famous filmmaker's name to market a film they barely touched was common in the indie world during the 90s, when distributors knew that attaching a recognizable name could significantly boost a small film's visibility. Fact 14. Mysterious fire starting subplot. Never explained. One of the strangest elements in Zebrahead is a recurring visual motif that appears several times throughout the film, but is never explained or resolved in any meaningful way. Kevin Corrigan's character can be seen in multiple scenes deliberately setting small fires on people's lawns, apparently targeting areas where natural gas is leaking from underground pipes or connections. The character approaches these spots with a lighter or matches, ignites the escaping gas, and watches as small flames erupt from the ground. These scenes suggest that this subplot was meant to be about environmental contamination in Detroit, where aging infrastructure and industrial pollution had created dangerous situations with gas leaks and toxic exposure in residential neighborhoods. The imagery is striking and unsettling, showing how environmental hazards had become such a normalized part of life in certain communities that a teenager could literally set the ground on fire as a casual activity. However, the film never explains why this character is doing this, what the larger implications are supposed to be, or how this connects to the main storyline about racial tensions and teenage relationships. The fire-starting scenes just appear periodically throughout the movie and then disappear without resolution, leaving viewers confused about what they were supposed to mean. This is one of the subplots that Roger Ebert likely had in mind when he suggested the director ran out of money to properly finish the film. It seems probable that there were additional scenes planned that would have developed this environmental storyline further, explaining the characters' motivations and connecting it to the larger themes, but those scenes were never filmed or were cut during editing due to budget or time constraints. Fact 15. Michael Rapaport paid his own audition travel. When Michael Rapaport heard about the auditions for Zebrahead, he was living in Los Angeles trying to build his acting career after having limited success in small roles. The auditions were being held in New York City, which created an immediate logistical and financial problem for the struggling young actor. At that point in his career, Rapaport didn't have studio support, an agent with deep pockets, or any guarantee that the production would reimburse his travel expenses, especially for what was clearly a low-budget independent film. Most actors in his position would have either skipped the audition entirely or asked the producers to review a taped audition sent from Los Angeles. However, Rapaport believed so strongly that this role was perfect for him and could be his big break that he made an unusual decision. He used his own money, which was likely very limited at the time, to purchase a plane ticket from Los Angeles to New York, specifically for the Zebrahead audition. This was a significant financial risk for an actor who wasn't established and couldn't afford to waste money on auditions that might not lead anywhere. Rapaport's instinct proved correct, as he impressed director Anthony Drizan during the audition and won the lead role that would launch his entire career. The fact that he was willing to invest his own limited resources into pursuing this opportunity demonstrates how much the part meant to him and how seriously he took the chance to prove himself. That self-funded plane ticket ended up being one of the best investments Rapaport ever made, opening doors that led to decades of steady work in Hollywood.